Hello, once more, everyone. Welcome back to the 2024 Big Ten predictions here this week for week number 4 as we get into it. Multiple Big Ten games this week with conference matchups this week, plus multiple non-conference matchups, a few Power 5 teams and non-conference matchups as well. Multiple games getting started. It all starts tomorrow night. Let's get started right now with the week 4 Big Ten predictions. Now 35-11 on the year after last week's 9-4 record. So let's get started. Week number 4 Big Ten predictions right now. And here we are, everyone. Welcome back. Big Ten predictions week number 4. All starting out tomorrow night in Lincoln, Nebraska, between the Nebraska Cornhuskers and Illinois, fighting Illinois in the top 25 for the first time since 2011, I want to say. I saw the matchup. So Illinois taking on Nebraska here tomorrow night. Looks like it's going to be a really good game for Illinois against Nebraska. On Friday night, both teams unbeaten, both teams in the top 25. Hard to believe Illinois is ranked in the top 25. Hard to believe Nebraska is also 3-0 as well, with both these teams coming in. This matchup looks like it's going to be a matchup where it's going to come down to whichever team can make the least amount of mistakes. With that being said, for this week, I kind of like Nebraska in this matchup, playing at home on a Friday night. They've proved that they can win games. Last week they proved it against Northern Iowa, winning 34-3. And the first 2 weeks, week 1, they proved it as well. They won as well against UTEP 40-7 when I predicted them to win. And they also won against who they beat. They also won in week 2 as well for Nebraska, 28-10 against Colorado, which I did pick them to win. So far there, I did pick Nebraska in all 3 of their matchups, and they've done me well in my predictions. I have predicted them to win all 3 of the games. I think they win again this week in a close matchup. I'm not sure what the final score is going to be, but I think it's going to be about whoever can control the game and whoever can have the least amount of mistakes. And I think Nebraska comes out on top, winning at home, as I think they improved to 4-0 as they get the win here this weekend in the Big Ten matchup. Against Illinois tomorrow night. Moving on, we have Charlotte coming into town. They're going to Big Ten country against 3-0 Indiana. Indiana last week coming off a win, surprisingly, against UCLA 42-13. A game I did predict UCLA to win, and kind of Indiana proved me wrong that they can be a team that wins. I've picked Indiana, I think, once so far this year, I believe. Yes, I have picked Indiana once or twice. So yeah, I did predict Indiana to beat Florida International, and I did predict them as well to win against Western Illinois, which they did 77-3. And last week was a mistake for me on my part picking UCLA against Indiana. I wasn't sure what I was thinking in that matchup, but I do think Indiana, looking at this matchup, Indiana might be a better team against Charlotte. Playing at home, 3-0, I think there's a chance to go 4-0. They can prove teams wrong, and they'll be halfway to bowl eligible after the way. They'll be halfway, almost bowl eligible. They'll need to win 2 more games after this here week if they get a 4-0 record to get a bowl game. I think Indiana gets the job done against Charlotte this weekend, so I think Indiana is going to win this matchup on Saturday afternoon here on Saturday afternoon. Let's go 4-0. Next up, we have the unbeaten Ohio State Buckeyes 3-0 going against Marshall. And the storyline of this matchup, which I thought was kind of weird. It was a really weird thing that happened. And the only thing I'll say about this is that this storyline that happened that I saw is Marshall's head coach came out and said that Ohio State players, if they want to transfer to Marshall, they'll have an all-you-can-eat biscuit NIL deal with a company that sells biscuits, and they're gonna have a deal for free that players will get the 24 hours a day. Now, I don't know what he's trying to get in the players' heads for Ohio State, and if you go to Columbus and your team's going to play against Buckeyes and you're saying things about their team, they're going to throw you down and beat you up. And I think that's going to happen after what the Marshall's coach said. I think Ohio State's going to make the plays they need to make to get a win. And so with that being said, I think Ohio State gets the biggest win in this game. I think they'll beat up on Marshall this weekend. So give me Ohio State in that one, in this matchup for Saturday afternoon, because I do think the Buckeyes get to 4-0 as well. Moving on. I'm going to stay in the Big Ten. We're going to go to Maryland and Villanova Maryland 127-13 last week, as they do come in. As you do look at it, Maryland is coming off a 2-1 record so far this year. But this weekend against Villanova, I think it's a game that's going to be interesting to see. Looking at the matchup on paper, it should be a matchup they should at least win at home to get a win. After last week, I picked against them against Virginia, and they went into Virginia 127-13, unfortunately. I learned my lesson there, picked Maryland against a former ACC team. Maryland got to win, but, so far against ACC teams, I don't have a very good record, but enough about that. Maryland, I do think against Villanova, I think it's going to be a home game. With a home game, I think they get a better game. I think they should get a better win at least this week. So I do think Maryland gets to win against Villanova. I'm not sure. I don't know much about Villanova, but I do know Maryland is pretty good. They're 2-1 on the year, and I do think they get the win to improve the 3-1 on the year. Moving on, next matchup in the Big Ten. Rutgers hitting the road this week as they head out to Vatech, Virginia Tech, out of the ACC. Another ACC game, another ACC matchup this week with Big Ten teams. Kind of interesting to see how this one's going to shape up for Virginia Tech and Rutgers. Rutgers last week, did I pick them last week? No, I did not. They were off, it looks like. Now, Rutgers had the week off last week, but I did pick Rutgers a few times already this year. If I look at it, I picked them to win 44-7 against Howard, which they did. And I also picked them to win against Akron as well, 49-17. And last week, Rutgers did not play. So Rutgers coming to 2-0 on the year. 2-0 on the season, coming in with 2 wins on the year. Going to Virginia Tech. I think this is going to be a tough test for Rutgers, a Power 5 matchup against an ACC team at Virginia Tech. I think it's going to be a matter of who can make the least mistakes, just like Illinois, Nebraska. It's a Power 5 matchup. Virginia Tech, I don't know how good they are this year, but Rutgers, they can win when you pick them to win, and they did that last week. I think this week, Rutgers and Virginia Tech, I think it's a close game. I think it's going to come down to who has the ball last this matchup. With that being said, I think Rutgers gets a win to improve to 3-0 after a bye week last week. So I'm taking Rutgers to get the win here on Saturday afternoon. Moving on. In the next matchup, we have Penn State going up against Kent State, a MAC team going into Happy Valley, Penn State. I'll say this, the MAC Big Ten those MAC Big Ten games are usually close matchups, for example. Unfortunately, this week, it's hard to say if that's true. I don't think that's true or not. When teams go to Happy Valley in the MAC conference, or any team in the non-conference going to Happy Valley, Penn State usually beats them up pretty well. And I'll say this real quick. Look at the MAC teams this year that have played in Big Ten stadiums. You have to look at it on paper. You have, way back in week 2, you had Eastern Michigan get beat 39 at Washington. That was a big score, a long, high-scoring game. Back in week number 2, you had so many. You had Bowling Green go play Penn State. Penn State won 34-27. That was a close game for Penn State's cause, which I picked Penn State to win that one. And then way back in week 1, you had Western Michigan lose 28-14 at Wisconsin. Then they lost to Ohio State on the road as well. They got beat up in pretty well. Yeah, that's pretty much it for Akron. They also lost to Ohio State 52-6. So you look at that. The matchups for MAC teams have been tough this year. There's been a few close ones, but Penn State, I think, against Kent State, it should be a really interesting game for them. I think that Penn State gets a key win this week. I don't think it's going to be as close to the Bowling Green game, but I do think Penn State gets a win to improve to 4-0 on the year, because I do think Penn State gets to win. Moving on to LSU. With LSU Tigers, SEC, Big Ten, UCLA coming in. UCLA coming into this matchup should be an interesting one. UCLA on the year 2-1. Their loss to Indiana last week was their toughest matchup. their second game of the year. They're only 1-1 on the year. They had a bye week in week 2 after winning at Hawaii 16-13. Had a bye week in week number 2. Didn't play. So 1-1 of the year. UCLA coming into LSU. Last time LSU played a Big Ten team was way back in week 1. They played USC and USC beat them in a close game. And that was the game I picked LSU. That was the game I picked LSU to win. And I learned my mistake last time around. USC beating LSU. I don't think that happens this time around though. But I do think that LSU gets the win here at home this time around, because UCLA coming in, I wanted one having to travel to Louisiana LSU to play a game. I do think LSU gets the win though. After picking them to beat USC and getting that wrong, I think LSU bounces back against Big Ten in my predictions. Moving on, next matchup. We're seeing in the Big Ten, Michigan, who is 2-1 after a 28-18 win against Arkansas State. It was a close game. They changed quarterbacks during that game. USC as well, the Trojans, they're coming in. Trojans coming in. They're looking a little hot. A little hot here in Big Ten play this year. USC, so far this year, in the first two games of the year, 1-0 against LSU, as I said, I got that one wrong, and then they beat Utah State 48-0. And then last week, USC had a bye week. And 2-0 USC, they're hot in the conference. They're riding high. You look at them on paper, USC's a pretty good team. Michigan, this is going to be an interesting matchup. USC's first ever Big Ten conference game as a team in the conference. I think Michigan's going to, and USC, this game's going to be one of the closer games this weekend by far. I do think Michigan, though, plays USC well. I think it's come down to which team doesn't make mistakes. I think Michigan gets to win at home this week and shows USC how you play in the big house against a Big Ten team in Michigan in the first Big Ten matchup. So give me Michigan for that one. Moving on. We have the Washington Huskies, who come in off a loss at 2-1 on the year after they lost to Washington State last week. And the Northwestern Wildcats coming in on a tough season so far for Northwestern. At 31-7 against Eastern Illinois last week. Unfortunately, that was a pretty darn doozy game for the Wildcats. Ever winning after losing the week before to Duke in overtime, 26-20, and then winning in week 1 as well, 13-6, which was a close game. Talking about this matchup, Washington, this game's going to be one of the more interesting ones to watch this week. Northwestern having traveled out west to Washington. It's going to be interesting to see. On paper, I think Northwestern has a good offense, but can they stick around and play with Washington the whole game out west in Seattle? I think Washington gets the win this week, unfortunately. I'm going to give Northwestern a loss, surprising. And that's what I think about that. So give me Washington there in this matchup. Moving on. We have my favorite team, the Iowa Hawkeyes, as they go up against the Minnesota Golden Gophers on Saturday night on NBC. The Golden Gophers of Minneapolis, going up against the Iowa Hawkeyes this week. Dusty helmet. It's a little dirty. Keeping up with the Pac-12 helmets, unfortunately. But, speaking of this matchup, Iowa Minnesota last year around, a 12-10 loss for Iowa at home against Minnesota. And the debacle of Cooper DeJean, was it a fair catch? Was it not? It was not a fair catch, I'll say that, from last year. And after a heartbreak last year for the first time in Iowa City since 1999, Iowa's going to go to place in Minneapolis, which is a tough place for them. They've had tough games there. They lost in 2010 and 2011 there, and also lost in 2014. So 3 losses in the last 10 years there. But they've won every game since, when they've gone back, since 2014. So Iowa looking to get a win this time against Minnesota. Can they win again at Minnesota and not lose? If they do lose, it will be the first loss in Minneapolis since 2014. I think Iowa and Cade McNamara, he just have to play good this week after playing against Troy last week, a close game, 38-21. I think Cade McNamara has to put the bad games behind him against Iowa State and Troy and just focus on Minnesota, and he'll get the job done. Depends how well he does. With a night game, it's going to be tough to win in Minneapolis, I think. But I do think Iowa gets to win and stays unbeaten there since the 2016 season. So I do think the Hawkeyes get the win there on Saturday night in prime time. So give me the Hawkeyes there to get their third one of the year. Moving on. Michigan State heads to Boston College on Saturday night on the ACC Network at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Michigan State, by the way, coming in off a 40-0 win against Prairie View A&M. Interesting name for a team, Prairie View A&M. I find that an interesting name. Just saying. And you beat them 40-0 too. That's the funny part of this season. When you beat teams up. And looking at this matchup, looking at Michigan State winning last week 40-0, and then previously, I picked them against Maryland. They won that game. But way back in week 1, I also picked them against Florida Atlantic. They won 16-10. So 2-1 Michigan State. I think they play and go to Boston College. I think this game's gonna be a close game against an ACC team. Unfortunately, but I do think Michigan State comes out on top and gets the win on the road on Saturday night. Which brings us to the last matchup of the night. We're staying in the Big Ten. The Oregon State Beavers going up against the Purdue Boilermakers out west in Corvallis, Oregon. Purdue coming in. They're coming off a 66-7 loss to Notre Dame last week that they got beat down after Notre Dame's loss to NIU this week coming up. I do think Purdue can prove us wrong. They've proven me wrong before. They're coming off a 1-1 record. They won 49-0 against Indiana State week 1, which they did, and then last week 66-7. They're 1-1 on the year, unfortunately. But I do think going up against Oregon State, they're coming off a loss as well against Oregon 49-14. I do think Purdue can play against Oregon State a little bit better this week around. I do think Purdue bounces back. I do think they get the win. But going to Oregon State, it's going to be tough for them to get points. I think it's going to be low scoring in this matchup, but I do think Purdue gets the win to finish off the Big Ten slate on Saturday night in primetime. So there you have it. Big Ten predictions for week number 4 in the books. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. I'll be back next week for week 5. Week 5 next week. Thanks for watching Big Ten Predictions, week number 4. I'll see you in week 5 next week on Thursday. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to watch, like, subscribe, tell your friends as well to do the same if they haven't done so. Also, don't forget to hit that notification button below so I know there is a new video. With that being said, I'm going to say stay safe and peace out. I'll see you right back here next week, everyone. Bye for now. Stay safe out there. See ya.